I never thought I'd be the kind of person who sits in silence while someone else takes credit for everything I've built. But that's exactly what I did for 2 years. 2 whole years of watching her smile at my ideas like they were hers. 2 years of staying late, pulling results, and watching her walk into the room and collect the applause. Her name was Natalie, and she was very, very good at being liked. Let me take you back to where this all started, because if I just tell you about that night, about the cab, about what came out of her mouth when she could barely hold her head up, you won't understand how heavy it felt when I finally heard it. You need to know what came before. I joined the company 3 years ago. Fresh energy, big ideas, the kind of hunger that makes you stay until 9 p.m. without anyone asking you to. I was hired as a senior marketing strategist, which is a fancy way of saying I was the person who made the numbers make sense and then figured out how to tell a story around them. Natalie was already there when I arrived. Same level, same title, completely different game. She had this thing about her, this effortless ability to walk into a room and make every single person feel like she had already thought of them. She remembered names. She laughed at the right moments. She asked questions that made managers feel smart. And she was always positioned near whoever held the most power in any given conversation. I noticed it within the first week. I told myself it was just confidence, that maybe I was projecting because I was new and she was established. I told myself to focus on my work. And I did. The first time I knew something was off was in the Q3 planning meeting. I had spent 2 weeks building out a campaign framework, audience segmentation, messaging architecture, channel strategy, the whole thing. I'd shared a draft with Natalie because we were supposed to be collaborating on a joint pitch. She had a few comments, nothing major, and I incorporated them. Then the meeting arrived. I walked in ready to present. But somehow, before I could even pull up my slides, Natalie was already talking. She walked the room through the concept, my concept, with just enough of her own language layered over it that it sounded like hers. She didn't lie exactly. She just never said my name. Not once. And when our director looked around the room and said, "Natalie, this is exactly the kind of thinking we need," I sat there with my laptop open and my mouth closed. That was the first time. I want to be honest with you. I didn't say anything then, and it wasn't because I was scared. It was because I genuinely couldn't believe it had happened. My brain was running through every possible explanation. Maybe she forgot to credit me. Maybe she thought we were so aligned it didn't need to be said. Maybe I was being oversensitive. I gave her the benefit of the doubt the way you do when you're not yet ready to accept what you're actually seeing. It happened again 3 months later. A brand positioning brief I'd written from scratch showed up in a presentation with her name at the top. This time, she'd changed the fonts and added 2 bullet points. That was the extent of her contribution. But again, the room lit up for her. Again, the director nodded like she was presenting something original. By the second year, I had a system. I kept my best ideas close until I was presenting them myself. I stopped sharing drafts until after the meeting. I learned to schedule conversations with stakeholders before Natalie could get there. I thought I was protecting myself. What I didn't realize was that she was also escalating. There was a promotion on the table, head of brand strategy. One of those roles that doesn't come up often. My director had mentioned my name in a one-on-one. He said I was a strong candidate. He said I should start thinking about what I'd bring to the role at that level. I left that meeting floating. 2 weeks later, Natalie somehow had a one-on-one with the same director. I don't know what she said in that room. I only know that afterward, the energy shifted. Small things. The director stopped looping me into certain conversations. Natalie started getting tagged in threads I used to own. Nothing official, nothing I could point to directly. Just that slow, quiet feeling of being edged out. I started to wonder if I'd imagined it, if the stress was making me paranoid. I had a few friends at the company, Sarah in creative, Marcus in data, and I remember asking Sarah one afternoon if she'd noticed anything. She looked at me in a way that told me everything before she even opened her mouth. Then she said, and I'll never forget this. She said, "I think Natalie is very deliberate about the impression she makes." That was all. But I understood. The office holiday party was in December. One of those open bar events at a rooftop venue downtown, with fairy lights and catered food, and everyone pretending they like each other more than they do in daylight. I almost didn't go. I was exhausted. I was emotionally done with the year, and frankly, the idea of making small talk with people who had spent 12 months overlooking me was not appealing. But Sarah convinced me. She said I needed to show face, that disappearing from social events was the kind of thing that got noticed for the wrong reasons. So I went. The first hour was fine. I had a glass of wine. I talked to Marcus about a project. I smiled at the right people. Natalie was there in a green dress, working the room the way she always did, laughing loud at the executive table, touching arms, being radiant. I kept my distance without making it obvious. I was proud of myself. Then the second hour happened. And the third. Natalie was drinking, steadily, noticeably. She was never someone I associated with losing control. She was too calculated for that, or so I thought. But that night something was different. There was a looseness in her that I hadn't seen before. Her laugh was getting sharper. Her stories were getting longer. By 10 p.m. she was clearly past the point of professional social drinking. I had called a car and was getting ready to leave when one of the junior coordinators, a young woman named Priya, pulled me aside and asked if I could make sure Natalie got home okay. Priya was clearly worried. She said Natalie had mentioned she lived in my direction and that she didn't want her getting into a car alone in that state. I almost said no. I came this close to saying no. I said yes. We got into the cab together just after 10:30. Natalie was still talking, still performing in some residual way, telling the driver how beautiful the city looked at night. I sat next to her and stared out the window and counted down the minutes. Then she went quiet. That particular kind of quiet that comes over people when the noise inside their own head finally gets too loud to talk over. And then she said my name, not in a casual way. She said it like it cost her something, like she'd been carrying it and needed to put it down. I turned to look at her. Her mascara had smudged slightly. Her green dress looked heavy on her. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at her own hands. She said she knew what she'd done. She said she knew I knew. She said she'd told herself it wasn't a big deal because we were working on the same team anyway, because the company benefited either way, because, and this is the part that stayed with me, because she was scared. She said she had been scared of me from the moment I arrived. She said she saw in me the kind of person who does the work and doesn't need anyone to watch them do it, and that it terrified her because she had spent her entire career making sure she was always the person people were watching. She told me about the promotion conversation. She confirmed it. She had gone to our director specifically to reframe her contributions versus mine. She'd been strategic about it. She'd used language she knew would land. She'd positioned herself as a culture builder and subtly questioned whether I was a leadership fit. She said those exact words. Culture builder. Leadership fit. She knew the buttons to push. I didn't say anything. I sat there and I let her talk, and she talked for the entire rest of the ride. She talked about her family, about the pressure she'd been under before she even met me, about a job she'd lost years ago, and how it had rewired something in her. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. I don't think she even fully understood she was confessing. She was just leaking. When we pulled up to her building, she looked at me and said she was sorry. Simple, small, like an afterthought. Then she got out of the car. I sat in that cab for another 20 minutes after the driver dropped me at my own building. I just sat on the front steps in the cold and tried to figure out what I was holding. Because here's the thing they don't tell you about getting the confirmation you always wanted. It doesn't feel the way you think it will. I had spent months wondering if I was imagining things, gaslit by my own need to believe people are mostly decent. And now I had her voice in my head, her actual voice, saying, yes, you were right. Yes, I did that. Yes, it was on purpose. And instead of relief, what I felt was grief. Grief for the 2 years. For the energy I'd spent doubting myself. For the promotion that should have been a real conversation, and instead was a quiet sabotage. I went inside. I didn't sleep. The next morning I did something I had been putting off for a long time. I opened a document and I started writing. Not a complaint, not an HR filing, just everything. Every instance I remembered, dated, detailed, specific. Every meeting, every deck, every piece of work that had passed through her hands before it was credited to her. I wrote for 3 hours. By the end, I had 11 pages. I'm not going to tell you it all worked out perfectly, because it didn't, not immediately. I'm not going to give you the version where I wave the document around and justice pours out like water. That's not how systems work, and you know it. What I will tell you is that having it written down changed me. It made the thing real in a way that living inside my own head for 2 years never had. And I think that matters more than the outcome. At least at first. You have to make the thing real before you can do anything about it. I requested a meeting with my director 2 weeks later. I came prepared. I didn't lead with emotion, I led with work. I walked him through a documented timeline of my contributions, with receipts, emails, timestamps, version histories. I was calm. I was specific. I was the person who does the work without needing anyone to watch. He was quiet for a long time. He asked some questions. He didn't immediately say she had done anything wrong, but I watched something shift in his expression, a recognition, a recalibration. The conversation I walked into as a person he had been slowly overlooking was not the conversation I walked out of. I'm still at the company. The promotion process was reopened. Natalie and I don't speak beyond what's necessary for work, not out of hostility, but because some bridges become functional after you stop pretending there's something else. She knows what happened in that cab. I've never brought it up directly. I haven't needed to. What I want to leave you with is not a lesson about workplace politics, although there are certainly lessons there. What I want to leave you with is this. The moment I stopped needing someone else to validate what I already knew, that's when everything changed. Not the cab, not the confession, not even the meeting with my director. It was the moment I trusted my own perception enough to act on it. She handed me the truth wrapped in champagne breath in the back of a cab, but I'm the one who chose what to do with it. And I'm still choosing.